Hi, welcome back to the Lord Lucan case on YouTube. In this episode, I'm going to be concentrating on Mozambique, which is a former Portuguese colony out in Africa. There appear to be a number of sightings and connections with the disappearance of Lord Lucan and the country of Mozambique. One of the first things I think I should mention is that in the year before the murder, so we're talking 1973 now, Lord Lucan had gone on holiday to Portugal with his children. So there's always been a bit of a rumour for various different reasons that Mozambique may have been a country that he ended up going to. And if you stay tuned to the end of this video, we will be able to inform you an interesting fact about a hotel register entry, or an entry in a hotel register that was found by a former MI5 officer by the name of Chester Stern. So stay tuned. There's a number of points to cover. This is completely off the cuff video, no editing involved, so please bear with me. I prefer to do these videos this way, and I'll refer to a book, my book, entitled Lord Lucan, Africa, A New Beginning, that was published in 2011. I refer to that book because there's various names here that obviously link to the story that I've told in the book involving Mozambique. So one of the things I'd like to also address is that when my book, Lord Lucan, Africa, A New Beginning, was first published in 2011, it appears as though one or two people may have criticized it for grammatical or punctuation errors. Just like to make it very clear that the sort of people who would buy this book normally are more interested in what I've got to say about the Lucan case because of the fact of my long-term involvement and commitment to the case, as opposed to criticizing the way it's actually written. Perhaps they should be more interested in the actual content. I believe that a couple of those reviews were written by friends of the Lucan family who tried to discredit what I've said in the book. So I think enough is now said about that. So let's try and move on. Not necessarily in any particular order here. You'll recall that there were two detectives who led the original hunt for Lord Lucan. That was Detective Chief Superintendent Roy Ransom and Detective Chief Inspector David Gehring. Roy Ransom had some contact with a Dr. Brian Hill, who had reported to Ransom that he had contact with a man who had informed him that he was Lord Lucan. And this apparently happened out in Mozambique. Bit of a long story, so we won't go into the whole thing, but Ransom basically was very, very impressed by what Dr. Hill had to tell him. And this involved a sighting apparently in 1975, where Dr. Brian Hill had spent some time with this man alleging to be Lord Lucan. And this actually happened in Mozambique. And I understand that Brian Hill eventually served some time in Cardiff prison, and Roy Ransom travelled to Wales and visited Hill in the prison. And he didn't seem to want to disclose much further information. So Ransom then left. But as Ransom had left the visitor area, Hill called him back and said it, made very clear and told Ransom it was Lucan. It was Lord Lucan. And I think this has always stuck in the mind of Roy Ransom, that it was a very convincing story that he had to tell. There's another interesting connection here with Mozambique. As the story has repeated itself for almost the last 50 years, Susan Maxwell-Scott, who was very close friendship, shall we say, with Lord Lucan, reported to police that Lord Lucan had called at her house after the murder. So on the night of the murder, he had travelled down to Uckfield, and she had gone to bed. So she got up, she let him in, had a couple of cups of coffee, whiskey, whatever, and he told her the story of it. So Susan Maxwell-Scott had always maintained that Lucan had called at her house, and then apparently she offered him the opportunity to sleep that night, and he said no, he must get back to sort things out. And it would appear, if you believe that story, that was the end of it. He just disappeared into the night, never turned up at London. And again, if you believe the story, then when the Ford Corsair car was found in Newhaven, it would then appear that he had left Susan Maxwell-Scott's house, suddenly had a change of mind, didn't drive north to go back to London. He decided to go to Newhaven, park his car in a street that was on the opposite side of where the departing ferry service served from Newhaven to Dieppe, and board the ferry and jump off and into the propellers and dead, never seen again. So that was all a very bizarre sort of made-up story. But anyway, getting back to the point about it was that Susan Maxwell-Scott, there were details found in a hotel register. It was the Hotel Estoril. And there was an entry there found by Chester Stern, the ex-MI5 intelligence officer, that in April 1975, that Susan Maxwell-Scott and her husband Ian had visited this hotel. Very, very interesting. Why would they have gone to that hotel? And it wasn't simply only that, but there was also information to suggest that Lord Lucan was in the area at that time. There was a former guards officer by the name of Major David Hardy. He was involved in a road traffic accident in the UK, and the first police officer on the scene, as is normal procedure, goes through the person's belongings, and he went through his wallet, and there was also an address book there. And in this address book, it showed an address in Beira, in Mozambique, for Lord Lucan, and it was care of a hotel, Les Ambassadeurs. So this was another interesting link with that country. Who knows? But, Chester, a very credible person, came across this link, has spoken about it several times in documentaries during the last almost 50 years. And it is most likely that Lucan fled between these countries, Mozambique, Namibia, avoiding the press when something would happen. If there was a cricket tournament going on in, Johannesburg, he would leave Johannesburg and fly to, Maputo in Mozambique, or he'd go to Windhoek. He certainly was down in that area. Lucan was a gambler. He was a gambler, as we all know. And there was no reason for him to suddenly turn around and commit suicide. No reason whatsoever. I'm just going to refer also to my book here. See if we can quote you. Very interesting about a police officer who made a quote, and he basically said that there was very good reason to believe that Lord Lucan was out in Africa. Okay, so on page 67 of my book, in 1988, a newspaper carried a report on the 21st of July in which Detective Chief Superintendent Drummond Marvin was reported as saying, and I quote, "I have no doubt that he got clean away with the help of his upper crust friends, the Sloane Square Mafia, who I believe still help him to this day." And he went on along the similar lines as to what I've just said now. Again, quote, he says, "A lot of people think Lucan killed himself by jumping into the channel." So in other words, the New Haven to Dieppe ferry that sailed in the early hours of the morning from New Haven on the 8th of November 1974, the morning after the murder. And the police officer continues, "But I don't think so. In my experience, you have to be bloody brave or completely mad to commit suicide, and we know he, meaning Lucan, wasn't brave and he wasn't mad." And he actually goes on further to suggest that he believes Lucan was hiding at the time. "I believe he is in Africa. I have information that he is there and using his British contacts to pour badly needed investments and hard currency into their coffers." So whether the officer is right or not, I think you have to consider all the other sort of things that have come out over the years. And a very significant thing, I think, as well, is that what Lord Lucan's sister, Lady Sarah Gibbs, had to say in November of 1981. And she made known that Lucan was not responsible for the death of Mrs. Sandra Rivett. He did not commit suicide after his disappearance. And they knew he was still alive and living abroad. I think it's a very interesting situation. And again, as with Namibia, which I've covered in a separate episode here on the Lord Lucan case channel, Mozambique has no extradition treaty with the UK. So there was no risk of him having to come back and be on trial here. So you read all these things as an overall picture. And just reverting back to the fact where Susan Maxwell-Scott has come to Lucan's aid and sort of said he turned up at her house and she offered him a bed for the night. No, he didn't want a bed. He had to get back. Why would the man drive down her driveway and suddenly change his mind and think, oh no, I'll drive in the opposite direction. I'll go and board the ferry. There's probably a ferry at this time of night. I don't know, but probably. Did he know there was a ferry at this, that time of night? I can't see that he knew that at all. But if you believe the story, he just drove off from the house, Grant's Hill House it was called, down in Uckfield. It no longer exists. It was demolished, and it's the site of a nursing home now. But do you think it's reasonable that he would have been able to kid Susan Maxwell-Scott that he was going to be driving back to sort things out, when actually in the back of his mind he was going to drive in completely the opposite direction, board a ferry and jump off into the propellers? And even Lady Lucan, a year after the murder, gave an interview to Thames Television News, and she was asked what did she think had happened to her husband. And she responded at that stage by saying, oh, he would have started a new life for himself. And the interviewer said, well, do you think you'll ever see your husband again? And Lady Lucan responded by saying, yes, it's possible. I don't think so, but it's possible. You never know. Anyway, later this year, 2024, I'll be bringing out a revised edition of my book that was first published, as I say, in 2011, entitled Lord Lucan, Africa, A New Beginning. So look out for that. And if you would be kind enough to help me out by subscribing to this channel, as I've said in previous videos, the analytics with Google help to actually raise the profile of this channel. And I think it would be lovely if we could actually discover some answers in this case after now what is almost, and what will be on the 7th of November 2024, 50 years since the brutal murder of the Lucan nanny, Mrs. Sandra Rivett. Thank you for watching.